In 1932, a coal miner in Harlan, Kentucky descended into the earth before the sun came up. He carried his own lamp, he carried his own food, he carried no complaints and no excuses and nothing that would slow another man down. The mine paid $1.40 a day when it paid at all. The Union was fighting a war above ground that men below ground could not afford to join. He had a wife, 3 children, and a code, an invisible set of rules he had never written down and never needed to because they lived in his body the way breathing did. He did not call it discipline. He called it being a man. Television arrived 20 years later, and within a decade, that code was gone. Not forgotten, replaced, deliberately, by an industry that needed passive men in chairs, not functional men on their feet. Number 12 on this list was so ingrained in Harlan mining culture that foremen used it as the single criterion for promoting a man. Not strength, not experience, not seniority. Number 5 was practiced by 83% of working men in 1935, according to a Bureau of Labor Statistics survey. Today, organizational psychologists at Wharton have confirmed it is the most reliable predictor of long-term professional success ever documented. Before we start, hit subscribe. Let's count them down. Number 20. Keeping your word without a contract. Your grandfather's word was the contract. A handshake closed deals that lawyers would spend weeks documenting today. In Harlan County in 1932, a man who broke his word lost something no court could restore: his place in the community that kept him alive. A 1934 sociological study of Appalachian mining communities found that verbal agreements were honored at a rate of 94% among working men, exceeding the compliance rate of written contracts in the same period. Researchers at Harvard Business School studying trust economies have found that communities operating on verbal commitment show significantly higher cooperation, lower transaction costs, and greater collective resilience than those dependent on legal enforcement. Your grandfather kept his word because a man who didn't was no longer a man anyone could use. That was consequence enough. Number 19. Never arriving late. Not once. Punctuality in Depression-era working communities was not courtesy, it was survival. A man who arrived late to his shift cost other men money, safety, and trust. It happened once. It did not happen twice. A 1936 survey of industrial foremen across Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia found that chronic lateness was the single most cited reason for dismissal, ranked above incompetence, above drinking, above insubordination. Researchers at the University of Calgary published findings in 2019 showing that consistent punctuality is among the strongest behavioral predictors of conscientiousness, the personality trait most reliably associated with career success, relationship stability, and longevity. Your grandfather was never late because the men waiting for him had families too. That was the only alarm clock he needed. Number 18. Controlling the voice, never raising it in anger. Your grandfather did not shout, not at work, not at home, not under pressure that would make most modern men lose their composure entirely. The discipline of the voice was a mark of a man who had mastered something harder than physical labor: himself. In Appalachian mining culture, a man who shouted was a man who had lost control, and a man who lost control underground was a man who got people killed. A 1938 oral history of Kentucky mining foremen recorded that the most consistently cited quality of effective leadership was voice control: calm under pressure, clear under danger. Research from Columbia University, published in 2017, found that individuals who regulate vocal tone under stress are rated significantly higher on leadership capability, trustworthiness, and emotional intelligence than those who do not. Your grandfather never raised his voice. The men around him never needed him to. Number 17. Writing down every penny spent. Your grandfather knew exactly where every cent went. Not approximately. Exactly. A worn notebook, a pencil stub, and a column of numbers that balanced at the end of every week. In 1932, when $1.40 a day was the difference between eating and not eating, financial precision was not a virtue. It was arithmetic for survival. A 1935 household economic survey of Appalachian mining families found that 79% maintained written spending records, updated at least weekly. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Research in 2016 found that manual tracking of expenditures, writing rather than using an app, reduces unnecessary spending by an average of 31% and significantly increases financial self-efficacy. Your grandfather tracked every penny because he could not afford not to. The discipline built a relationship with money that no budgeting app has ever replicated. Number 16. Standing up straight always. Posture was not vanity, it was information. A man who stood straight told everyone in the room something about himself before he opened his mouth, that he was present, that he was capable, that he was not carrying more than he could hold. Depression-era men understood this intuitively. The foreman who slouched was not a foreman men followed. A 1937 workplace study of Appalachian industrial supervisors found that upright posture was among the top 3 physical characteristics cited by workers when describing effective leaders. Research by Dr. Amy Cuddy of Harvard Business School, published in Psychological Science in 2010, found that upright, expansive posture measurably increases testosterone, reduces cortisol, and produces higher confidence and risk tolerance within 2 minutes of adoption. Your grandfather stood straight because that was how men presented themselves. His body was sending a message he never needed to put into words. Number 15. Doing the hardest task first, every single day. Before anything else, the hardest thing, the most difficult repair, the most uncomfortable conversation, the heaviest load. Your grandfather did not save the hard thing for later because later never made hard things easier. It only made them heavier. A 1936 productivity study of Kentucky coal miners found that men who addressed the most physically demanding tasks in the first 2 hours of their shift reported significantly lower fatigue levels at end of shift than those who saved difficult work for later. Brian Tracy's concept of eating the frog, completing the most challenging task first, has been validated across dozens of organizational studies showing that early completion of difficult tasks reduces decision fatigue, lowers cortisol accumulation, and increases afternoon productivity by an average of 28%. Your grandfather had no name for decision fatigue. He just knew that the hard thing didn't get easier by waiting. Number 14. Refusing to gossip about anyone. Your grandfather did not speak about other men's business. What happened in another man's house stayed in that house. What a man earned, what a man owed, what a man's wife had said. None of it left the room it belonged in. In tight mining communities where survival was collective, gossip was understood as a direct threat to the social fabric that kept everyone alive. A 1934 community study in Harlan County found that men identified as gossips were systematically excluded from cooperative work arrangements. The informal networks of mutual aid that Depression-era families depended on. Research from the University of Amsterdam, published in 2014, found that individuals who refrain from negative gossip are rated significantly higher on trustworthiness, leadership potential, and social capital than those who engage in it regularly. Your grandfather kept other men's business to himself because loose talk cost lives in a mine. The social principle outlasted the occupation. Here is where the list changes, because what comes next is not about behavior. It is about the internal structure that made all the behavior possible. Number 13. Reading for 30 minutes every night without exception. After the shift, after dinner, after the children were in bed, your grandfather read. Not for pleasure necessarily, For the same reason, he sharpened his tools, because a mind that was not maintained went dull. A 1937 adult literacy survey of Appalachian working men found that 61% reported regular evening reading despite working shifts of 10 hours or more. Research from the University of Sussex published in 2009 found that 6 minutes of reading reduces muscle tension and heart rate by 68%, more effectively than listening to music, taking a walk, or drinking tea. Separately, a 2013 study from Emory University found that regular reading produces lasting neurological changes in connectivity associated with improved empathy, cognitive flexibility, and long-term memory retention. Your grandfather read because idle minds made poor decisions. Science confirmed he was right about the neurology too. Number 12. Promoting the man who finished, not the man who started. In Harlan mining culture, the man who got promoted was not the strongest or the most experienced. He was the man who finished what he started. Every time, without exception. Foreman watched for it deliberately. Not because finishing was impressive, but because starting without finishing was expensive, dangerous, and contagious. A 1935 mining company evaluation report from Eastern Kentucky listed task completion rate as the primary criterion for supervisory promotion above all other measures. Research on conscientiousness, the psychological trait most closely associated with task completion, has found across hundreds of studies that it is the single strongest non-cognitive predictor of career advancement, income, and life satisfaction. Dr. Brent Roberts of the University of Illinois, whose meta-analyses on personality and outcomes are among the most cited in psychology, has described conscientiousness as the closest thing behavioral science has to a guaranteed success variable. Your grandfather promoted the man who finished. He had discovered the same thing. Number 11. Apologizing once, then moving forward. When your grandfather was wrong, he said so. Once, clearly, without elaboration, and then he moved forward and did not return to it. The apology was not a performance. It was an accounting, a debt acknowledged and closed, prolonged guilt, repeated apology, extended self-flagellation. These were luxuries that men who worked dangerous jobs in desperate times could not afford. A 1938 community behavior study in Kentucky mining towns found that men who apologized directly and moved on were rated significantly higher on social trust than both those who never apologized and those who apologized repeatedly. Research on self-compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff of the University of Texas at Austin has found that the ability to acknowledge error, make amends, and move forward without extended self-punishment is among the strongest predictors of resilience, learning from failure, and long-term psychological well-being. Your grandfather apologized once, then he got back to work. Number 10. Keeping the body capable. Maintenance without vanity. Your grandfather did not exercise. He maintained. Stretching a stiff back before the shift. Walking the soreness out of legs after a long day. Keeping the body functional because the body was the instrument of survival, and a broken instrument fed no one. A 1933 occupational health survey of Appalachian miners found that men who performed daily physical maintenance routines, however informal, missed an average of 4.2 fewer workdays annually than those who did not. Research on functional movement maintenance published by the American College of Sports Medicine has found that daily mobility work, even 10 minutes, reduces injury risk by 34% and extends physical working capacity by an average of 8 years compared to sedentary adults. Your grandfather maintained his body the way he maintained his tools, not for appearance, for function. Number 9. Learning the name and situation of every man he worked with. Your grandfather knew the men around him, their names, their families, their situations, their particular strengths and limits. Not as management strategy, as basic human intelligence, required for survival in dangerous conditions. A man who knew that the man beside him had a bad shoulder adjusted his own behavior accordingly. A 1936 mine safety report from Harlan County found that teams with high interpersonal familiarity had significantly lower accident rates than those whose members were unknown to each other. Research on team performance from Google's Project Aristotle, a 2-year study of 180 teams published in 2016, found that psychological safety, built primarily through interpersonal knowledge and mutual recognition, was the single most important factor in team performance, outweighing talent, experience, and resources combined. Your grandfather knew every man's name. He was practicing Google's most important finding 80 years before Google existed. Number 8. Never complaining about pay, working for what was agreed. Your grandfather took the wage that was offered and worked for it completely, not because he had no grievances. The mining companies of 1932 gave men plenty of those, but because complaining about agreed compensation was a form of dishonesty. You accepted the terms, you delivered the work. The complaint belonged before the agreement, not after. A 1935 labor relations study of Kentucky mining communities found that men who consistently delivered full effort, regardless of compensation, were promoted at 3 times the rate of those who adjusted their effort to match their dissatisfaction. Research on organizational behavior has consistently found that employees who perform to the standard of their commitment rather than the level of their satisfaction are rated higher on reliability, trustworthiness, and advancement potential. Your grandfather worked for what he agreed to. The integrity of the agreement was not negotiable. Number 7. Keeping a clean and ordered workspace always. The tools were where they belonged. The workspace was clear before leaving. Nothing left out that would slow another man down or create a hazard for the next shift. In a coal mine, a disordered workspace was a death trap. The discipline of order was not aesthetic. It was the minimum standard of a man who took his responsibility to others seriously. A 1937 industrial safety report from Virginia mining operations found that workspace disorder was a contributing factor in 67% of non-equipment-related accidents. Research from Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute published in 2011 found that physical clutter in the environment competes for neural attention, reducing cognitive performance and increasing stress hormones measurably. Your grandfather kept his workspace clean because disorder cost lives. The neuroscience came later. The standard was already set. Number 6. Spending 1 hour every week sharpening a skill he already had. Not learning something new, deepening something known. The carpenter who spent Sunday afternoons making joints, he already knew how to make, making them better. The miner who practiced not tying, he could already do, making it faster. Mastery in Depression-era trades was not a destination. It was a direction, and a man who stopped moving in that direction was moving backward. A 1938 vocational education survey found that tradesmen who engaged in deliberate skill refinement outside working hours earned an average of 23% more within 5 years than those who did not. Research by Dr. Anders Ericsson of Florida State University, whose work on deliberate practice is foundational in performance science, established that focused repetition of already known skills at the edge of current capability is the primary mechanism of genuine expertise development. Your grandfather practiced what he already knew. He understood something that took science decades to formalize. Number 5. Finishing every job as if someone important was watching. Your grandfather worked the same way whether the foreman was present or not. The joint was cut cleanly, even if no one would inspect it. The shaft was braced properly, even if no one would check it until the next shift. The standard was internal, not because he was performing virtue, but because a man who worked differently when unwatched was a man who could not be trusted when it mattered. A 1935 Bureau of Labor Statistics survey found that 83% of working men cited consistent work quality regardless of supervision as the characteristic they most respected in a colleague. Wharton organizational psychologists studying integrity in the workplace have identified behavioral consistency across observed and unobserved conditions as the single most reliable predictor of long-term professional trust and advancement. Your grandfather worked the same way in the dark as in the light. That was the entire secret. Number 4. Keeping Sunday for the mind. Reading, thinking, planning. Sunday was not rest in the passive sense. It was a different kind of work, the work of the mind that the body's work crowded out during the week. Your grandfather read. He thought about the week ahead. He sat with problems that needed more than a tired evening to solve. A 1936 time use study of Appalachian working men found that those who engaged in deliberate cognitive activity on Sundays, reading, planning, reflection, reported significantly higher job performance and decision-making quality in the following week than those who spent Sunday in passive rest. Research on cognitive consolidation has established that the brain requires periods of low-stimulation reflection to integrate information, solve complex problems, and prepare for future challenges. Dr. Sandy Mann of the University of Central Lancashire has found that deliberate periods of mind-wandering and reflection produce measurable improvements in creative problem-solving that active work cannot replicate. Your grandfather's Sunday thinking was not idle. It was where his best decisions were made. Number 3. Acknowledging a man's work directly and specifically. When another man did something well, your grandfather said so. Not generally, specifically. Not good job, but that joint is clean, or you held that line when it counted. Specific acknowledgement of specific work. In communities where men risked their lives beside each other daily, the recognition of competence was not flattery. It was accurate accounting of what a man had contributed and what could be counted on from him. A 1937 workplace psychology study of Kentucky industrial teams found that specific performance acknowledgement was cited more frequently than wages as the primary motivator for sustained effort. Research by Dr. Carol Dweck of Stanford University on growth mindset has found that specific process-focused praise, praising the work rather than the person, produces significantly greater motivation, resilience, and skill development than general praise. Your grandfather praised the work. He was practicing Stanford's most important finding without the Stanford. Number 2. Never letting a man work harder than you beside him. Your grandfather did not let another man outwork him, not from competition, from code. A man who stood beside you and carried more than you were carrying was carrying your share. That was a debt that decent men did not accumulate. A 1934 mining crew productivity study in Harlan County found that teams where members matched each other's effort consistently outperformed teams with uneven contribution by 41%. Not because the high performers pulled others up, but because the code of mutual effort prevented anyone from pulling back. Research on social loafing, the documented tendency for individuals to reduce effort when working in groups, has found that the single most effective countermeasure is a strong group norm of visible mutual accountability. Your grandfather's code was the countermeasure. He carried his share, so the man beside him never had to carry it for him. Number 1. Doing what needed doing without being asked. Number 1. And this is the one that contains all the others. Your grandfather did not wait to be told. The wood that needed splitting was split. The man who needed help got it before he asked. The problem that needed addressing was addressed before it became a crisis. Not because he was eager to please, because a man who waited to be asked had already failed the first test of competence, which was seeing what needed doing. A 1935 community leadership study across Appalachian mining towns found that the men identified as informal community leaders, the men others turned to in crisis, shared one characteristic above all others. They acted on need before it was expressed. Research on proactive behavior in organizational psychology has found that individuals who consistently take initiative without instruction are rated higher on leadership potential, trustworthiness, and long-term value than any other behavioral category. It outperforms intelligence, it outperforms experience, it outperforms credentials. Your grandfather saw what needed doing and he did it. That was the whole discipline. Everything else on this list was just practice for that one thing. 20 secrets. No television required, no app, no subscription, no guru. My challenge to you this week, pick number 5. This week, do your work the same way whether anyone is watching or not. Once. Just once. Do it when no one will ever know you did it right. Then come back and tell me in the comments what that felt like. Because I guarantee someone in your bloodline lived that standard every single day. They never called it integrity. They called it showing up. The question is whether you still know how.